right about that time. I know the food is just so compelling. Can't wait to take a bite. I'm so hungry. These cookies look awesome. So if you guys want to just grab your seats real quick, we'll get started. So first off, thank you very much for coming. This is very exciting for us to have like a good, like an intimate crowd for ACMP NorCal. This is also like a cool thing for us because it's rare that we do a lot of events and activities in San Jose in the South Bay. So hopefully you guys are excited, and hopefully we'll be doing a lot more in the southern part of the Bay Area. Traffic is always a nightmare. So anytime I see like a room at like after 5, like, with a good audience, I'm like, oh, that's awesome. These guys really brave through it. So I really appreciate you guys coming out. My name is Shoaib Sheikh. I am the ACMP Northern California chapter president. So on behalf of myself and the board, we are really happy to have these types of events to kind of unify a lot of the change practitioners that are working in the Bay Area. The chapter is part of a global organization called ACMP, Association of Change Management Professionals. If you guys don't know about it, they've got a great website. They're actually, I don't want to oversell them, but they're modeled kind of like the PMI. If you guys are familiar with the PMI and how that operates, the Project Management Institute. They've got chapters located all around the globe. We are one of 14 chapters in the US. I think 2.5 years ago or 3 years ago when I joined, we were about 8. So it's spreading to a lot of different cities. They actually have about another 6 or so chapters in Europe, a couple in Latin America that are starting. And one of the coolest things is that the Northern California chapter, I mean, we are really, if you look across the dynamic of the companies and the people we interact with, our peers and colleagues, we're at the center of transformation. I mean, we're dealing with companies that are transforming the landscape of not just the area or the US, but really the world. And I mean, that's amazing to be interacting. I mean, it's a blessing for me to be interacting with people like you that are, actually driving these amazing transformations you hear of in Forbes and Newsweek and all that. So kudos to everyone that's working in the change profession, regardless of if you have the hat of change manager or if you're a program manager, project manager, or just someone that's interested in the discipline. We're here as a chapter to support you in learning more about what change is, offering great partnerships with Artisan today, with other partner organizations to give you insights into what the discipline is about, deep diving into some of the topics like the one we have today on Agile, and really, giving you a support system. Sometimes as change managers, we're there in our field, in our profession, in our role, kind of like the change person, and we look around and there's sometimes no one there behind us. So, from a chapter perspective and from a board perspective, we really want you guys to be able to connect with the chapter to feel like you're a part of the community. And that's been my, over the last 2.5 years, that's been my purpose, is to give the chapter a sense of community. And, we've done pretty cool things. We hold annual symposiums. So we do them once a year. They're usually about 100 to 120 people. We have great guest speakers. We hold workshops. So ProSci, if you've heard of them, who has? There you go. So a lot of us have heard of them. A lot of us have gone through certification. So we have workshops from ProSci or other, accredited institutions come and give us workshops. And this is all facilitated in a day full of fun, networking, food, etc. Our next one is a little teaser on October 19th. It'll be in San Francisco at the Mina Gallery. So again, hopefully you guys can come. It's going to feature another sort of a 6-hour format with a panel, keynote, and we'll also have a workshop. So again, look forward to seeing you guys there. Few other quick things from a chapter perspective. One of the big things that we are always looking for is for folks that are interested in joining leadership roles. So I want to kind of throw that out there to you guys, because as we sort of transition and transform even our chapter and our leadership, it's always good to get fresh ideas and people that are passionate about extending their careers, not just from their day job, but actually adding back into the discipline. So again, open call out for you guys. If anyone's interested, please reach out to myself. Meg is here as well. Meg is our director of membership. Simon Foster is not only a great tour guide at Adobe, but he's also our marketing and communications director. So please reach out to us. We'd be happy to get you guys integrated, involved, volunteering. There's a lot of side projects and stuff that I want to do. It'd be great to get your insights in on as well. So again, thank you very much for taking time out to come out today, and we hope to see you guys a lot more often. Great. So that's the ACMP part. Now, today I wanted to kind of talk to you guys. First, actually just introduce our speakers that have, one of the ways that we really try to do our activities and these types of get-togethers is partner with industry experts, people that have been doing, either practicing or implementing the topics that we're discussing. We'd like to bring those partners in to kind of give their insights, their experiences, and again, lead from not just having kind of talked about it, but actually done it. So we're really, again, blessed to have, David and, Parker here today to kind of talk to you guys a little bit about how Agile and change kind of merge together. David Wells, David and I actually had a great chance to work together at Cisco, so I'm really happy to see him again. But for about 20 years, David's been transforming, consulting, designing, and implementing large programs. He's nodding his head, which is great because he knows all the efforts and trials and tribulations he's gone through, and hopefully you'll hear about it a little bit today. He's also certified in SAFe as a program consultant. He's an Agile transformation expert. I remember taking a 2-day class?
Yeah, the ProSci class that you facilitated.
The ProSci class, and then you were also the trainer at the Agile class, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, it's chock full of information. If you want to know what Agile is, the mechanics, David's your guy. One of the great things I think that David always strives to do, and actually I won't even read it because I know it, is that he says that do what you say you will do. So I mean that's an awesome quote, and wow. That's really kind of
that is an old one too. That's been one of my favorites for decades.
Yeah, but you embody that I think in everything that we've interacted with. So I think we're really good to have David lead this discussion. And I got to ask because this was in the bio, mono skiing, is that just with one ski or is that with one leg on 2 skis?
It's both feet on one ski. So
awesome.
You Google mono skiing. That's one of my favorite things.
That's perfect. So during the break, we're going to see YouTube videos of your mono skiing.
I don't know about that. We'll see what I can find.
Awesome. And then our other speaker today is Meg Johnston. As I mentioned, Meg is Director of Membership for ACMP NorCal, but your alter ego, but your superhero capabilities lie in the fact that she's been an amazing organizational change lead, currently for Woodside, working with Cisco. I know Meg from a previous program and project. That's how we got to know one another. And beyond just being an expert and implementer of change practices and methodology, Meg's just a really cool, down-to-earth person. And I think that's what really, we all as change agents, we're really kind of gravitate those types of people. We all have that innate ability to kind of just be the magnet of our companies, and people will come to you regardless if it's change or not. And Meg is a true embodiment of that. So great change leader, but even better person. So with that introduction, I'm going to leave it up, get it up to you guys. Thank you very much. I've left some business cards. Please feel free to reach out to us. And again, we'll hope to see you guys soon.
Thanks, Sean.
Yeah.
You want to ask a big question or shall I ask?
Fast.
So part of our inspiration for creating different programs, common Agile. I think we're Agile. Can't figure out what it did for us. Benefit. This is something that as an Agile consultant, with my background as a program manager, I'm always thinking about we need to close the loop and make sure that we got the benefit we were setting out to get when we went down this path. So Parker and I have been years now working with clients in Agile transformation and talking about this very question. Are we seeing the expected value delivered from the Agile transformation itself? And I'm not talking about a particular program that we decided to do in an Agile fashion. I'm talking about the decision to go Agile and to transform the way that we work Agile. So I'm just really interested in a show of hands. Anybody here experiencing this and experiencing your company asking itself this question? We've gone Agile, but we're not really sure we thought we were going to get out of it. I see a few heads nodding and a few hands going up. So what I'm going to share with you today is just some observations from our particular firm, from our particular couple of us very seasoned practitioners of this. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I do think that part of the root cause of why we have to ask ourselves this question and why some people struggle with answering it does lie in this intersection of Agile and change management. And so we mentioned ProSci a minute ago. If any of you are familiar with ProSci, you might have seen there's a lot of noise right now about this intersection. So hopefully it's timely. I'm going to try not to, because I don't know everyone's background, I'm going to try not to take for granted that you all understand what I mean by Agile or Agile at scale. So we'll talk a little bit about some definitional things. Then we're going to really drill into what are those mindset shifts that if we don't actually attend to the change management aspect of an Agile transformation, will undermine benefits. So that's really what it's about. It's going to be interesting to see this little timeline here. First, just to kind of level set, when we talk about Agile at scale, I'm really talking about big programs and efforts here. Now, I'm not talking about small 1 or 2 Scrum teams, relatively confined efforts. When I talk about Agile at scale, imagine a $50 million program or $100 million portfolio of projects, dozens of teams. And the way we traditionally, of course, everybody knows what this is, right? This is probably, maybe the terminology is a little bit different, but this is what we all call waterfall, right? This was the state of the art for executing large projects and programs to deliver a solution, whether that was a new business process or whether that was a new product or software or combination of software and hardware. It doesn't really matter very much. This is kind of the essential abstraction of the way we all used to go about it. If you're PMI trained people, PMPs here, PGMPs, well, there's at least one PGMP here, right? So we start by identifying problems and opportunities. Business management is involved here with some actual users and some program managers. We charter a project, we define requirements, define a solution approach. And what we're doing here really is if you were to think of it from the standpoint of a lean work stream, right, we're taking a really huge batch of work typically through this series of handoffs. Inherently flawed? Would anybody agree with the thesis that this is inherently flawed from the outset? This is why it's not really viewed by very many people anymore as the state of the art, right? Huge batches of work. What do I mean by batches? I don't know if that's a lean concept. It comes from lean manufacturing. What I'm really talking about is thousands of requirements typically. So if you've ever seen a program scope document that thick and a stack of business requirements documents like that high for one release of a solution, that's what I'm talking about when I use the term big batches work. Very long lead times. In my experience with these very big programs, it's 6 to maybe 18 month lead times is probably the worst case I've seen. So this is really the traditional waterfall. Anybody want to postulate some of the inherent flaws with it? Do you think there's a lot of opportunity for error every time we go through one of these handoffs? They're one of these stages. Opportunity for work to queue. Do you think that requirements have a shelf life? That if they sit out there for too long, they become irrelevant and invalid? Absolutely true, and it's why Agile is gaining the traction it's gaining right now. And what I'm going to show you is not an official version of this, but when I talk about Agile at scale, as Shoaib mentioned, I am what's known as a safe program consultant. So I am particularly an advocate of this specific version of scaling up Agile. It's not to say this is the one right way to do it, but this is definitely a method of scaling up Agile that has shown itself to be very successful. It's called the Scaled Agile Framework. If you've never heard of the Scaled Agile Framework, you might want to write it down and go to scaledagilepFramework.com. Much of what I'll talk about with Agile at scale is derived from the concept of Scaled Agile Framework. What Scaled Agile Framework does is it takes the core principles of Agile, most of which derive directly from the Agile Manifesto, published, I believe, in 2001, and many of which have proven themselves over and over again to be extremely effective, at least at relatively small scales, right? With Scrum teams, those principles and practices that we learned work really well. Also marries that up with concepts of lean manufacturing, Toyota production system ideas. And it tells us, as we put those together, this gives us the framework for how we can scale up. We can use those agile methods and principles for very large and complex undertakings. And, you know, in my mind's eye, it looks kind of something like this. Instead of that long sequential flow, what we really have is we have multiple interlocking sort of loops of collaboration that operate at different levels of specificity, of abstraction, as you think about your solution that you're trying to deliver, or your business problem that you're trying to deliver value against, right? So at the highest level, we have a portfolio management function because, let's face it, if we're talking about large scale, big investments, we have a fiduciary obligation to have a portfolio management function. You cannot get away from that just because you've declared you're going to be agile. That doesn't mean you can go off and spend $50 million however you want to. You have to have some level of balance of due diligence in your financial decision making, right? It's finding the right balance point. So you have business and IT management, you have users and stakeholders, architects, portfolio managers, and they're deciding what are the big boulders we want to move, perhaps over the next year, right? Or maybe just over the next quarter, right? What are the big boulders we want to move? And that's a portfolio management function. You have people called product managers that take that definition of the big objectives we're going to go after, and they start breaking those down into sort of more precise marching orders, if you will, for the teams. They work, you know, again, with users and stakeholders. They work with architects and analysts to figure out how are we going to go about solving for this big boulder in more bite-sized chunks, maybe chunks that we can get done in a month or a couple of months or within a quarter at least. And we usually call those features in this lexicon. Ultimately, those features wind up in the hands of product owners that work with the actual teams. Now we get down to that atomic element of the Scrum team that operates via the Agile principles. But again, if you're doing something very large, $50 million investment, that means you probably have dozens of Agile teams, maybe at least a dozen. And they can't just run off willy-nilly, operating as they each see fit. And you expect that the composite output is going to be a coherent solution. So you have these sort of three interlocking loops of collaboration working. And the SAFe model is actually even a fourth one that I decided to not busy this up with. Now what we're talking about, we're talking about much smaller batches of work, much more rapid cadences. Does that sound familiar? Anybody who's heard of lean before? Right? Small batch sizes, rapid iterations. That goes right back to Taiichi Ohno and the Toyota production system. Right? Really important because that's part of the strategy for ensuring that what comes out the pipe eventually isn't stale. It isn't the solution we would have liked to have had a year ago. It's a solution we need now. So this is just to level set everybody on concepts. I see a lot of heads nodding. It looks like this is pretty familiar. Anybody want to pause and Q&A on this baseline of concepts? Because what we're going to go to next is really this intersection of this kind of thinking and this kind of process with change management. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the mindset shifts, and I don't know if it's just evident to you, but if I go, animations are my way. If you just think about this model, you think about all these people are used to working in a certain way. They're used to, basically at its core, what we're really talking about is how we organize the work. Right? So each party in here is used to the work being organized in a certain way. Now we move to this, and it's organized completely differently. Right? The titles aren't even the same. Everybody has to change the way they work. Everybody has to change the way they think, the way they make decisions, the way they interact with all the people around them. It's all very different. That sounds like a case for change management. Exactly. So
just back on that slide,
yeah.
A thought that, as I'm sure you will cover, is that relationship between each of these roles and the role relationship, how to manage that change, is as you break it down from major individual product managers, individual product owners have relationships with each other. They have their product, their team, how that relationship changes. I'm interested in seeing.
Definitely. We will definitely talk about some of the details of some of the roles. We actually have some pretty deep material that goes very much role by role. Here are the specific changes. We don't have all of that here, just in the interest of time, but we'll touch on some of it. What I actually want to try to break down now is, what are the most important changes? And so for me, this is one of the biggest mindset changes, and it's also one of the root of some of the biggest changes about how everybody operates differently. Instead of, these huge batches, very long lead times, thousands of requirements, 6 to 12 plus months. Now we're talking about small batches of work, very rapid iterations. That is a fundamental shift for everybody involved, that whole value chain. That change affects everyone. Certainly affects the change management people, as Meg will talk about in a few minutes, but it affects the product managers, program managers. Nobody operates the same way once you make that shift to the lean concept of small batches and rapid iterations. Leadership style needs to be very different. I highlight this because not only is it very impactful, in my professional opinion, this is one of the most important reasons why some organizations wind up feeling they didn't get benefit. If you ignore this, if the agile transformation is viewed as simply something IT is doing or product engineering is doing, but we business guys, we don't need to change anything about the way we operate, then I can virtually promise your company will not get benefits that they want from the agile transformation. This agile at scale relies greatly on really tapping into the intrinsic motivation of the people on the teams to come to work every day and do good work, add value every day. Top-down command and control, high verify, those are anathema to an agile team. So if your leadership sticks with the old mindset that worked for them before, then you're going to see that setting the ceiling on what you'll get out of your agile transformation. This is a really, really tough one for business people. This is a really tough one. I mean, we were all taught the same way, right? The first thing you do is fix the scope. And the more detailed level at which you fix the scope, the better chance you have of getting the outcome you want, right? Not if you're talking about a 12-plus month project with thousands of requirements. That's actually a great way to introduce a lot of waste. And actually, it's also a great way to deliver the wrong solution that doesn't actually yield the value that you want. Agile at scale relies on a different model. I'm going to have to walk closer to this thing. Where we fix our goals in terms of the business outcomes and the value that we're trying to yield, right? We don't fix our scope up front. We fix our goals, time frame over which we're going to pursue those goals, and the rate at which we're able to invest in pursuing those goals. The scope is the last thing that gets nailed down. Why is that important? Why is that better? You think a lot of people really struggle, especially customers, business executives who are funding these initiatives? Do you think they really struggle with this idea? What do you mean you're not going to tell me up front exactly what I'm going to get for my $5 million or $50 million bucks? This is really crucial because up front is when we know the least we're ever going to know about the problem we're trying to solve. That's the worst time to nail down your scope, right? We need to leave room for variability to express itself as we go along and as we learn more, as we try things. We use this. Anybody heard the phrase MVP, minimum viable product, right? What's the point of that? The point of that is to learn. We're trying to learn what is really going to scratch the itch and really going to be well received by the marketplace. We don't presume that sitting here in our ivory tower, we're omniscient. We know that was this way, right? This way. We presume we know up front. Well, isn't it our job to know up front? That's the old school program management way. We need to allow for variability in scope because, frankly, that fixing of scope too early is where a lot of the waste crept in. Has anybody ever worked on a business requirements analysis effort and heard a stakeholder say, look, I got to get this in now. If I don't get this in now, I'll never get it. What does that say to you right away? That thing that you're insisting on is really not very important. You even know it's not very important, or you wouldn't have said that to me. If it was very important, it would find a way to get done. So that's waste. That's how waste creeps into the big batch, right? So Agile at scale, scaled Agile framework says don't do that. You fix these things, you let the team learn over time. The very idea of minimal viable product, right, is the idea of lean experimentation, right? So we're not sure that we know what's going to be exactly the right answer for the marketplace. We're going to find a way as quickly and as inexpensively as possible to test our value hypothesis, right? We think the market's going to like, let's say it's a Fiat 500, right? We think the market's going to go crazy for Fiat 500s, right? We're not really sure. This is a really interesting graphic that comes from the Spotify product team that talks about the right way to do it. And it's very counterintuitive for a lot of people, right? What are we doing if we follow the bottom model? Why is this good? Why is this better? Well, if you started out thinking your goal is a Fiat 500, then this is probably a pretty nutty way to go about developing a Fiat 500, isn't it? But if you start out saying, no, the value we're trying to deliver is a mode of transportation, and we're not really sure which mode of transportation the market's going to go ape for. So let's try something. It's quick and easy and see if the market likes it. And if they like it, let's keep evolving it. You know, this also, I love this graphic because this also illustrates one of the biggest pushbacks against Agile. What do you guys see is, especially from technical people, pushback against Agile? Rework, exactly. I hear a lot of, I'm surprised actually how often technical people or engineering people will complain, but this is stupid. This is stupid. I can't use any of that to build that. Are they wrong? Are they being dumb? No, they're not just being arbitrary or dumb. The thing is, if each step in this progression helps us, A, learn better what's actually going to solve the problem, and B, it lets us unlock some value as we go, that's why this is a great way to go. Every time we do one of these steps, we learn something new that helps us ultimately deliver the better fit for purpose in the product. Okay. See if I can get my. So when we do these Agile transformations, these big impacts here, fixing goals, not scope, small batches, rapid iterations, the self-managing team concept, you know, the departure from the old-fashioned sort of heroic leadership model, the move towards the post-heroic leadership model, where leader is facilitator, not, you know, the boss, not command and control. These require virtually everybody to change the way that they work, as we talked about. Executive sponsors, we need them to cast the vision, enable the teams. This is very tough for most executive sponsors, isn't it? What are they typically thinking about? What do you think is going to be their pushback? Most of these people are used to that traditional leadership model, right? They're used to a certain flavor of accountability. Has anybody ever encountered pushback on the basis that Agile, you know, doesn't provide any accountability? You know, I need a single neck to choke. What do you mean? Empowered self-managing team. Who's my single neck to choke then if I don't like the outcome? This is a big mindset shift. It's a difficult mindset shift. In order to get these people to understand what they have to do, they first need to understand why it's actually going to be better. They need to understand the causality between their leadership style and the actual outcomes they'll get from an Agile team. And for that, they need training, they need change management. Program and project managers, completely different way. And again, we've all been trained. I say they, I'm actually saying in first person because I'm on this. So this is me traditionally, right? We've all been trained to nail that scope down first. We're not trained to learn as we go about what it is we need to deliver to best solve the problem and deliver the best value. That's something that is a little bit alien. That's not something you're going to see in most PMI curriculum. The idea that rework is wasteful, just what we talked about a moment ago, is a big obstacle to overcome. This idea of iterative learning as we go. Also managing expectations. So this is really where I see a lot of organizations breaking down, because even if you get the project and the program managers attuned to this, so they understand rapid iterations, We're evolving our thinking about the solution as we're building the solution. Some people might even say we're building the airplane while it's on the runway, right? Trying to take off. It's a commonly used metaphor. So even once project and program managers get this, if their bosses don't, then now they're in the pinch point now, aren't they? Like they're trying to explain this to a leadership team that is still in the old mindset of fixing the scope first. The shift to Agile, well, we pivot mercilessly as we learn. We don't worry about sunk costs. We don't worry about rework. We worry about what's the next step in the evolution. And if we can reuse a lot of stuff we did last step, that's great. If we can't, so be it. If we have to change out some architectural component that served us well for the last 2 years because it won't serve us well for the next 2 years, so be it. We know what we need now. Delivery schedules evolve over time. So most Agile teams I work with, they have specific schedules of when they're going to deliver. Where does the variability manifest? Exactly what's going to be ready when. Right? There has to be some tolerance for that. Change is expected and welcomed rather than controlled. Sometimes when we talk about waste in the context of large solution development, that's puzzles folks sometimes. What do you mean by waste? Has anybody ever sat on a change approval board looking at project change requests to decide if your team's going to be impacted and can you approve the request? Would you suggest that might be an example of a non-value added activity in the traditional waterfall process? That's my least favorite thing to do. It's expected and welcome. So basically the idea is we're organizing ourselves in a way that it's not a big deal to pivot when we realize that we need it. Product managers probably wouldn't even have that term, or if we had that term, it meant something very different. If you were in a commercial organization, engineering commercial products, you might have had that term, product manager. It means something a little bit different here. That said, it certainly within the scaled Agile framework, if that's the method you're following, these are probably the people that are most singularly accountable. Still not singularly accountable, but they are the most directly accountable because they're the ones who are telling the teams, these are the features I need you to give me in order for the product to succeed. And then doing that by translating these business outcomes into features that the product teams can understand. Right? So if you can give me these 5 features, I can make some hay in terms of revenue growth or in terms of customer sat or customer retention or whatever business outcome I'm after. Really crucial for these folks to build and maintain an effective network of stakeholders they can rely on. Why is that? Can't expect any product manager to know everything, right? That's ivory tower syndrome again. If you think, well, they're the single neck to choke, they better know that's their job. That's repeating the same mistake that we made in the waterfall world. What they need is they need stakeholders who can help them constantly vet their thinking. And think about this, small batches, rapid iterations, and now it's affecting the stakeholders too, isn't it? It's not just team. So we have to equip these folks for the transition to the new cadence. There's new tools, there's new artifacts, there's new terminology, and there's a new cadence of work that we have to equip them with. We have to teach them this concept of lean experimentation, the value hypothesis, and help them learn how to test them quickly. And also help them understand the interdependence between product management and change management. So very often, the teams that are most successful, these two groups are really kind of joined at the hip. So product management can't deliver real business outcomes in most contexts without help from change management. Very easy to deliver a solution, lob it out there. And with zero adoption, you get zero business value. Conversely, change management, since they are highly impacted by this new idea of rapid iterations, they are a customer of product management. If you want me to help you drive adoption, you got to give me some features that are going to make it easy for me to communicate to the target audience about what's changing. These two roles are really tightly interconnected.
I think an important one on this one, and I like the relationship that kind of answers some of my question, is like you talked earlier, some of that relationship is peers, is other subject matter experts, but some I think of that relationship needs to be up, is setting and reinforcing the expectations around how Agile product is delivered to leadership, to the portfolio managers, and to the other ones in that first circle that you described.
Very true. Very true. Again, if we fail with any one of those role players to get them to understand the new mindset and how their behaviors change, it's going to undermine the whole effort. So I have definitely seen many cases where that top level of leadership, the executives, really are still stuck in that big batch waterfall mindset. And it puts the product manager in a terrible position because they're trying to execute in a lean agile fashion against expectations that are still coming from the waterfall domain. So product development teams, believe it or not, I was really surprised by this because honestly, when I first started practicing Agile, coming from a traditional program management point of view, I thought most development teams would think this is like developertopia. Oh, this is great, small empowered teams, we get to call our own shots. I've been surprised by some of the pushback that comes from the technical people themselves because they're not necessarily always crazy about this. So just to illustrate this a little bit, everybody gets impacted. So it's very common that the requirements that you're working on this sprint, you're actually changing code that you worked on 2 sprints ago. Or maybe you worked on it every sprint for the last 5 sprints, you're tired of it. And developers sometimes struggle with that reality. Testers also, I find, often struggle with this. This is actually one of the communities that pushes back very hard because they're saying, look, you can't expect me. Every time you're adding more requirements, every time my tests get bigger and bigger and bigger, I can't keep running all these tests every 2 weeks. It's just not possible. By the time I get down here, I've got 2,000 test cases. It's going to take me 2 weeks just to run those 2,000 test cases. We have to help them all understand. Bottom line, I've heard this more times than I would have ever dreamed of. Why can't you just bring me all the requirements at once? I've heard it from architects, I've heard it from developers, I've heard it from testers. Very surprising. So do you think when they push back, you think they're being arbitrary or dumb? No, there's things we have to do to make this viable for them. If we ignore that, it won't be viable for them, and we won't get the benefits out of Agile.
Part of it is change of working that has to be very transparent. Transparency creates, there's no place to hide. And that's what they're really worried about. Right? Also, because in a freer space, I don't show you what I'm doing. I'm done.
That is definitely a big mindset shift for everybody. That there's what I would characterize as extreme transparency is the best practice in an Agile environment. Everybody's very clear. Anybody can go at any time and look into our Agile tool and see, here's exactly where all the work is. There's no place to hide that kind of environment.
And then the other part is the code refactor in software, at least. There are hardware companies doing this, but as well, code refactor, well, we say refactor, but most people think in terms of fail.
Yeah.
It's the failure, and it's a very deeply woven into our culture, not just a company.
You're absolutely right about that. That's what I've heard from a lot of developers. When they say, well, if I have to go back and rework this thing later, that means I did it wrong the first time. Right.
Psyche of failure.
It is really an unavoidable consequence of this iterative development approach, right? So we have to get everybody to come around to the fact that, no, that's not failure. It doesn't mean because you have to do some refactoring, because now this part of the system has gotten really difficult to change. It doesn't mean you did everything wrong before and you failed. It's just a normal consequence of the iterative development. Yeah, so there are mindset shifts here that are going to challenge everybody. What do we need in order to get everybody over these humps? We need change management to help these people understand. So the big failure I see too often is a declaration, we're going to do this body of work in an Agile fashion, but we're not going to invest enough in helping people really get over the hump and overcome their resistance, learn how to actually be successful at it. That's part of the reason why we wanted to do this talk. This is a big one I see a lot of times. I tell all the people that I work with coaching that the way you manage resources is going to have to change a little bit. Now, I'm not here to tell anybody that you can't have a global resource distribution model anymore. That would be kind of dumb. Nobody would listen to me if I said that, and that's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that there are good ways to do it and bad ways to do it. If you do it badly, as you move to Agile, you're going to completely undermine your Agile teams. So the worst thing you could do is put an ocean in the middle of a Scrum team. Anybody have ocean or continent in the middle of their Scrum teams right now? Almost everybody. Yeah, this is a tough one. Now, I've seen some clients actually get it, like right away and say, oh, okay. So what you're saying is, wherever I have people, I need to have complete Scrum teams. Bingo, exactly. Stop putting 11.5-hour time difference between your product owner and your Scrum team. By the way, those two, they need to interact like several times an hour on most teams. Have a really effective Scrum team. So this is one major point that's really difficult for resource management. Another one is this. This is a truth that anyone with an industrial engineering or operations research background knows inherently, because the science proves it over and over and over again. Almost any kind of resource, doesn't matter. Could be people, could be machines, could be Highway 101 at rush hour, right? Once the loading gets about 85%, the throughput crashes. Now, most resource managers are trained and maybe even financially incented to maximize resource utilization and minimize resource cost above all else, right? That's what it means to do a good job if you're in that role. Now, once you move to Agile, you'll absolutely cut the legs out from under the throughput of your Agile teams. So that's a lot of, that's not all. Again, we got a bunch of more content. But I don't want to go too deep.
So the only little remark I'd make, most of us inherit this.
Yes.
And the honest conversation to be had is, you want people to be inefficient. This is the perfect way to do it. You can still do Agile.
That's exactly right.
But you're going to be, because of these oceans, you're
you
going to
Yep.
lose productivity or 3 days in 2 weeks.
And it's very likely that 1 year from now, or 2 years from now, some of your leaders are going to be sitting in a room talking about, why didn't we get the benefit from Agile? We did it. We went Agile, so we don't write business requirements documents anymore. We write features and stories. But where are the great, why did we do this? How's it paid off? It hasn't paid off. It won't pay off if you don't put these principles in practice. On the contrary, one of the first groups that Parker and I worked with right away saw this problem. Their problem was actually in India. They had vendor A in Bangalore doing development and vendor B in Pune doing testing. They're not going to be able to collaborate well. They immediately said, oh, okay, well, that's easy. I'm going to go to vendor A and B and tell them, I want each of you to give me complete Scrum teams. So do your own dev and testing. Problem solved right away. One of the most productive teams we had there.
Question.
Yes.
So because it sounds like a lot of people have the teams that are distributed. Has anybody seen where they've been able to make that work across the oceans?
Yeah, in the sense of you're going to have loss of productivity, and you have to be upfront, honest about that, and then go with it.
Yeah, the case I was just referring to is
so
probably the best I've seen, where they immediately got that, okay, in every location. So I've got a bunch of people in RTP in North Carolina, I got a bunch of people in San Jose, a bunch of people in Bangalore. What I need to do is reshape what they're doing so that I've got complete teams in each of those locations, as opposed to a team here builds something, they throw it across the Pacific, and a team over there tests it.
Large organizations like Adobe and Cisco and others can't do that simple setup of the teams across entire teams, because there are also boundaries of how the companies are set up.
Yeah, that's why I asked.
A lot of this also has to do with just, what was your frame of reference? So a lot of people think this is actually really good to have my developers strewn all across the globe, because now we can work in a follow the sun model, right? They actually think it's going to help go through, but they don't understand it. So one of the big differences here when we move to Agile is we're not creating all of those artifacts, all those stacks of documents we used to create. So what's the substitute? The substitute is collaboration. That's really what makes those documents no longer necessary. That same need doesn't exist, but that only works if you put people together. Other comments on this?
The only thing that I was thinking about is, we have a portfolio resource management person that looks at resources committed over a period of time. And this is talking about, Scrum teams and the resource management around that. But how does Agile work when you think about like the ebb and flow, because when you have waterfall, you can kind of predict, okay, you're going to have an intense period of time here, and then it's going to,
And
then it's
depending on
gonna
what
ebb
your
off,
role
and
is,
yeah.
that those peaks and valleys come at different points in the life cycle, right?
Right.
So in fact, I think it's one of the things we're going to talk about with stakeholders.
Okay.
Right? So they have certain peaks that are going to all get leveled out into a more level. But what I wouldn't want you to get the impression of is that when you move to Agile, then you no longer have any workforce flexibility. That's not at all what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say, though, is geographical distribution of resources matters a lot, and it can have a profound effect on your actual group. So when you have your teams formed up and aligned to value streams that are enduring areas of effort, right? Projects come and go through those value streams. Well, when a new huge project comes into your value stream, then you absolutely can raise the resourcing level of that value streams.
I would challenge it the other way, because we think in terms of projects. That's why you do the resource flow, ebb and flow. If you think in terms of product and product dedicated teams, then they have a longer life. So if you're thinking in projects still and thinking portfolio set of projects, and then you're constantly struggling with that resource mapping that you're trying to do, optimize on that. Don't optimize on that. Optimize on the product and the product team. Adobe is, I'd like to say, yeah, we are a product company. Our CEO talks about this is a product company. We do products. Now that doesn't mean there are parts of our business which Simon will say, yeah, they operate in projects.
Stepped out of the perfect moment.
In projects. So that's a big shift.
And you can think of it as pivoting the matrix, right? Because very often today we organize people around a project, and that project might hit 6 or 8 different products. The safest recommending is organize around your product, and the projects will come and go.
Right.
Other comments about this? Thoughts? This is a biggie. It also, obviously, it has contract management consequences, right? So when that one particular team that got this right away, they had to go revise contracts for the next with each of those vendors. I think there was any negative consequences that were related. So we're going to talk about a couple of the rules. You're going to talk about stakeholders.
Yeah. Thanks, David. So when it comes to stakeholders, we saw that there's a couple of the core concepts up front, like that rapid iteration, right? The fact that we are not getting all the requirements up front. So if I'm a stakeholder, it's going to change things. If I went, and let's see, how far do I have to go back here? Well, actually, we can just stop right here. If you see that each one of these iterations here, and they actually end up in these sprints, they end up being then resulting in a release. And you saw in the earlier slides where we saw that the users and the stakeholders are actually embedded within those teams. So it's not just a one-time effort with the stakeholder, but it's a continuous ongoing engagement with the stakeholder. There's good news and that's bad news for stakeholders, right? Because that means that it's a much greater commitment from them. It's a different way of working. It's fantastic news from the perspective that Agile is really a stakeholder input driven model. I think that's pretty exciting because in change management, we're looking for how do we actually get the voice of the stakeholder really involved, right? So Agile has you set up for that, set up for success. But the problem is if I'm a stakeholder, I may not actually want that kind of a time commitment. So how do we address that as change managers?
So in this case, you're talking about involved stakeholders.
Yes.
Okay.
Very good distinction to make, because for each of your stakeholder groups, especially in particular in the really large program initiative that we were working on together, I was working with Parker and David, the impact was across, tens of thousands of people, right? And you've got so many different stakeholder groups that I was in fact having to interface with 9 different change management teams. So you're not going to be able to have stakeholder input from all stakeholders, but you're going to have your stakeholder representatives that are there and have to be then deeply embedded. Just like you saw earlier that there needs to be this connection between product management and change management. Why is that? It's because the product managers have to establish the ongoing engagement. They have to establish their network of stakeholders. Who's the best person to help them do that? there's great training out there for your product managers on how to do Agile, but the training doesn't really include on how do you build your stakeholder network, right? How do you actually promote stakeholder engagement? That change management piece is missing. And so that's one of the things that we saw. We needed to be able to come alongside and help the product managers do that. And as a matter of fact, for me, since I was involved with this, it was my first Agile initiative that I was working on. So it was a real learning process. So, but at any rate, coming back to the stakeholders here, besides the continuous engagement, the other big issue is scope is not being defined. So you're look at that, yeah, far in advance. Far in advance. You've got the vision, you know where we're kind of going, but the different stops along the way may not meet what stakeholders' expectations may have been in the past, right? So it's really difficult for them to understand that we're going to deliver this, and then we're going to learn from that, and then we're going to deliver again. So for them as well, they have to have a kind of a reframing of how they approach their expectations for the solutions that are delivered. So from our side, we have to focus on because this is part of Agile, right? It's not just about delivering code, but it's delivering something that has a business value. So we have to be able to focus on that business value and help the stakeholders string together the business value that's being delivered to them over time.
So the challenge we often see at the stakeholder and the highest level, at least, they want the certainty now.
Yes.
Which, the false certainty that David was talking about. The requirements give them that false certainty.
Right.
So the big challenge in most Agile environments that we see is that I want that certainty now. So do what you want to do. It doesn't matter if you're doing iteration, I don't care. But I want that information, which may be 12 months in the making. I want it now. So even that behavior, then the rest of the organization starts essentially doing Agile under the umbrella of waterfall.
That's right. Agile fall, they were calling it.
Right.
Yeah.
And my question then is, how do you, whether you call it change management or whatever, how do you get them to feel confident or comfortable with not having that control and certainty at that point in time? How do you get it?
Well, because you have to create, and this is what's kind of fascinating about this Agile transformation is because it's actually a transformation that is almost sort of the social change that we're seeing, that there's change is pervasive. And part of what we've been focused on now from an organizational perspective is how do we create environments or cultures that embrace ongoing change?
Change within the
right? What were you saying?
The change within the change.
Yeah. Well, and there's another reason we're calling this. Sorry?
You have to pay her now for the flood.
Yeah, pay her now for the flood.
So maybe there's another component, you touched on it just a second ago that we experienced, which is this is great for your engaged stakeholders. Right? Those are the people who are helping you build the skateboard and then the scooter and the whatever. But then you have those impacted stakeholders that are not part of the engagement. And what we find is that the change manager has an additional opportunity for value in considering the rollout, not from a feature and MVP perspective, but from a user saturation perspective. Because I promise you, if you tell me you're going to teach me to ride the skateboard on Monday, and then in 2 weeks it's going to be a scooter, and then by the way, in 2 more weeks it's going to be a motorcycle, and by the way, I have a day job that I have to execute while you're hitting, and you get to that change saturation point really quickly. So what we have learned to do is to say, so from a design, build, test, implement, MVP perspective, absolutely chug that along. And the change manager has to scan across that landscape and look for those cadence points where now you have a big enough collection of things that you kind of re-affinitize it and go out to those non-engaged users who have been sitting there happily doing their day jobs, waiting for you to, help them, and go, okay, now you've got this chunk and it's got this kind of value associated with it. And it needs to be a big enough value that they go, all right,
and it's important for people, and I don't know if that's what you were gonna say, because that's what we came to, right? And that initiative too, is that just because code is developed and ready doesn't mean it has to be
Correct.
delivered.
That's
It
right.
doesn't have to go live at the end of that sprint. And so that's one of the things that we actually touched upon, because we needed to group things, to group the delivered, the developed, let's say, code together and the features together, and then deliver them.
The SAFe curriculum really talks about this a lot. In fact, one of the mantras of SAFe is develop on cadence, but release on demand.
Mm-hmm.
And so the product management curriculum, part of what they teach is the decision about what to release and when is separable from pace at which you're building. Right? You could think of it in the sense that at the end of every sprint, you potentially have a release candidate. That doesn't mean you're going to release it. And so what you're bringing up is definitely part of the calculus that product managers need to do. Is this a good time to release? So
Well, and that also,
time in the fiscal calendar, right? How much
Yep.
other stuff is going on right now?
and back to your notion about your executive stakeholder, if you're anchored around the outcome, and then you're saying to the stakeholders, this is not about your features and your scope, this is about your outcome. Okay, well, your outcome is in the second quarter of the year, you're going to be able to do X. We're going to have 5 releases of MVP before then, but then you bundle that up for your organization, and now you have the capability for X. And that helps a lot with those executives.
And with the stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because then you're
But
able
also-
to actually communicate something, because
you're
otherwise
refocusing on
there's,
outcome.
yeah, there's a danger with communications become really tricky. When we don't have scope as change managers, I mean, that's like, how many times have you been actually previous to Agile, where it's like, well, we can't, I'm sorry, we can't do the change strategy because we haven't defined scope yet. Whoa, that's challenged then with Agile, isn't it? So it's, we have to adjust our own perspective. And a lot of what we do is we're focused on how do we help other people manage to Agile or adapt to Agile, but how do we do that ourselves? So, and that's what we'll get to in just a second, did you want to add something else?
Yeah, I was just going to say, the concept of release cadence versus development cadence and so forth, those all good and fine at the tactical team level. It's less so at the higher, because their experiences of, they were once in software company, they were once software developers. Their experience were baked in the past. So therefore, that certainty that they were feeling from the past, you can't unwind that. Do as you may say, yeah, I'm going to get you, 3 releases or whatever in the 6 months or 9 months.
I think if we
the
can
challenge.
come back to this in a moment. I'm
Yeah.
in a few minutes. I'm going to
Sure.
talk about the change management surrounding the Agile transformation itself, and I think it'll speak somewhat.
Right.
And I think that's, I mean, the part of what we're sharing here is also that need for change management and where it's needed. And there's different ways that we're seeing that Agile is rolled out, and there's, so I think we're going to touch on some of those, but some of the keys here to helping your stakeholders is that because there's an increased engagement with those stakeholder, let's call them representatives, right? The people who are representing this, those are the ones who have the most frequent and ongoing engagement. You have to make sure that you set that up in some way that it's regular, it's predictable, that it's as kind of low touch as possible, right? So that you're reducing the impact to them. It's expected. They know what's going to happen, and also again, always focusing on the benefits. And one of the things that I also want to share here is, again, it's like a lot of the time with it, and what I've experienced, so I'm just going to call out, I'm not an expert on Agile. What I'm sharing with you today is based on the last, say, 3-4 years. But I will say that it's kind of like when you go into the Army and you go through training, right? So you know a lot and you know how to shoot a gun and everything, but you really don't know anything until you've been through your really big first battle. And that's what I went through, I think, with that multi-year program that we were on. That was intense. Just to give you an idea, I was responsible for 2 tracks, and one of them we did 14 releases in 12 months. So it was a trial by fire.
And it wasn't just 14 releases in 12 months, but it's releases that had varying impact to stakeholders. So some of them were real small, communication would even be good. Some were massive. Okay, so that is that's the kind of the trial. So that's where I'm coming from and sharing what I have, and I want you to speak up if you've got something like Julie had that is going to work for everybody here, because that's what we want to do is just create a discussion. But let's see, what is it I want? Oh, okay, so the Agile training was fantastic, and the Agile coaching that I saw was fantastic. That's a plug for you guys. For all of the teams. I mean, we're talking about the product managers, the product owners, the developers. They were talking the talk, they were walking the talk, or they were doing it. And if they stumbled or they needed help, they had the support, right? But where we saw the gap was leadership, right? Leadership wasn't there, and also stakeholders and change managers. So that's just for me, like the 3 areas where I saw the major gaps. And so really there's not training out there that we had that we could send the stakeholders to. So that's why you really see that when you're talking about, did I just go back? Oh yeah, here we go. I went forward because I wanted to share with you. This is actually one of the things that we developed as part of that initiative, to be able to understand the different touch points for the stakeholders. You have the portfolio Agile commits, feature sign-offs, you've got, your release planning workshops that are held, the readout that went to the stakeholders, you've got all of your sprints and sprint demos, the feature, so it's like, and it's going again and again. So we were trying to make sense of all of our stakeholder engagements, because as change managers, we were new to this, and we needed to figure out how could we create a structure around it and create a predictability and prepare our stakeholders so they knew ahead of time. And what was great is we started to have this feeling. It's like, okay, we know that the next feature sign off is coming up, right? There were new things that we needed to put in place too. Okay, you got a sign off. Well, what does that really mean? How are you going to collect the sign off, especially when you've got something that's huge and you've got so many different stakeholders who are involved, and you've got finance that's got to have their say, and you've got legal that's got to have their say. So how do you get the sign off on some of these things in a quick and efficient way? This is Agile. This isn't something else. So, all of these different engagement touch points require change management to do not only the stakeholder management, engagement support from our side, but also the partnership with product management to support them and to support the product owners and how they're engaging with the stakeholders. So what this comes down to, and this is also why we're calling this the change within the change, because ideally, and David in a little bit is going to touch on this, is ideally you take an organizational change management approach, right? Your organization would decide to go Agile, and you would then be able to put together your change strategy and your plan, and you would identify, you have your impact assessment, which, by the way, we were doing a little bit of that for you in those previous slides, right, about the impact for each of the roles. So now you have the deck, you can take it away, you can add to it what you know, and hopefully we've got something in there that's new for you. So you run your impact assessment and you do your strategy and your plan. That's the ideal. You're going to get everybody on board, help that mindset shift, right, to an Agile mindset. But a lot of the time, and personally, what I've experienced, that hasn't happened. And that large initiative, and in 2 different programs since then, it's really been, we're going to do Agile while we're actually rolling this out. So that's why we look at this as a change within a change. You have to call it out as change managers. You have to identify that this is another path of adoption. It's another change curve, and it's separate. You can build it in, but really it needs to be separate. And also, as you can see, a little bit in advance the other. Ideally, it'd be a lot more in advance, but the reality is it's just a little bit in advance that you can just stay a little bit ahead in terms of building the awareness of Agile and the understanding, right, and the acceptance and the adoption and so forth as you're going through your program. And what did this look like in our situation? This meant that because we didn't have, I mean, we were already executing. Boy, I got on board and went to the first stakeholder briefing because they'd already been, it was one of those cases where the change manager came in a little bit later, right? Brought in a little bit later. And I come in and they'd had a stakeholder briefing and I'm in there and the stakeholders are going, you know, product managers are beautifully trained, everybody's ready, and they're talking Agile speak and the stakeholders are like, what are you talking about, right?
Where are the BRDs?
Yeah, it's like, where are the BRDs? You know, and, you know, why haven't we established this? And what are we doing? And there's no business commit. And they're, you know, so they're talking waterfall. And the team, which is beautifully prepared and trained, is talking Agile. And so there's like a lot of resistance, a lot of unrest, a lot of unhappy people, and me in the middle going, whoops, what did I just get myself into? Right? So it's really key that there is an awareness, and it's great because I believe that we're now, I mean, this was 4 years ago. So things have changed a lot in 4 years, a lot more focus on it. I think leadership's more aware of the fact that we need to have some change management, that we need to get people on board. At this time, I had to do work really fast, right? First, I had to get the two groups, stakeholders and the team, both frustrated with each other, understanding, right? Sat down with both basically and say, I see you're frustrated. Talk to me a little bit about this. And both were like, well, they, you know, the team was saying, they don't understand Agile. They don't understand what we're saying. Stakeholders saying, I don't know what they're saying.
Well, they agreed.
Right. They see it was actually beautiful because there was all this tension and problem, right? And I had these separate meetings and they both came to the exact same conclusion. They needed some training. So because of that, we were able to, because that was the way that I got the buy-in from everyone and we could start doing. So from then on, every single meeting we had, we always started with some kind of explanations. We explained every single thing we were doing. If we ran then a feature sign off, if we ran, you know, the readout from the well, it was called multiple things, but the release planning workshops, the RPW readouts and so forth, we let them know this is where this falls. You know, we'd always bring up that stakeholder engagement touch points and we'd refer back and we would, but it had to be sort of embedded training because there was no way that the project was going to allow us to step away and run some kind of, you know, big Agile adoption separate from it. So it had to be alongside it. And so we did have some pain. So that's why it is better if you can do it separate. All right. So let me go forward because I know I got to take a look at the time here. So I'm not going to go through and drain all of these either, but just to, you know, I've called out, you know, so how do we drive the adoption? If we've got this rapid iteration, you know, how is it that we're able to assess the impact when the impact might vary quite a bit from one release to the other? How do we manage it if the leaders are not actually empowering their teams, right? They're not letting them be heard. The team may be, one of the things that we experienced is the team was coming back and saying, we can't deliver this. We can't execute. These are some of the things that we've got. But leadership saying, you have to do this. We need to move forward with this, right? So, you know, how do you deal with that from the change management perspective? So this is one of the top things I'm going to call out here, and probably have done this already, but if you haven't, get certified. You have to become yourself knowledgeable about Agile. You need to continue to pursue the understanding, like what's the latest things that are happening, understand the version of Agile that's being applied. So I got the Safe Agilist, right, training, because that's what we were applying, was a scaled Agile framework. You have to make sure that Agile is a part of everything that you do. You have to embrace it to the point that rather than creating one great big change strategy and plan, which I then thought, oh, no problem, I'll just have some like sections in this for the release. Yeah, I bet you can imagine I abandoned that pretty quickly when I was doing, you know, releases in every month. So instead, you have to take a programmatic approach to everything. It's like everything else with Agile. You have to create structure in order to have ultimate flexibility. And you guys can correct me anywhere on this. This is just, a practice, someone who's been in the trenches and what I experienced. But I realized that I couldn't do these long assessments of impact. So what did I have to do? Empower my own team. I was really fortunate to have a very talented, very smart instructional designer working with me, that when she got in there and she would attend the different meetings, like feature meetings or stakeholder meetings that I couldn't be at. And so then she would call out to me, there she goes, instant messaging, hey, we got a new stakeholder group, right? So it's empowering your team so that they can identify where impact is, that they can make shifts in strategy, that they can decide that there needs to be another video or we need to do another communication. They can come to you so that it's not you trying to figure it all out. So it's very much like kind of running your own like Scrum teams too, because you've got to have those frequent like daily conversations about how are we going to adjust. At any point in time, I was always closing off one release in the middle of executing another and already assessing the third out there. So what I can share with you, and I wasn't successful in making this happen for me, so lesson learned, is I actually think, and I throw this out there and you guys can test whether you think this is a good idea, I put together a job role called, it was a release change manager. Because the track and the impacts and the different stakeholder groups were large enough and the frequency was that frequent, and they were delivering it out to production, right? So we had these concerns. And so I think a release change manager is something to consider, where you can have a change manager who can still be operating at the strategy perspective, can work with leadership, can make sure that they're looking for the long view, right? And the release change manager can help to manage those releases and coordinate the communications and the training and the engagement touch points that are around each of the releases. So what I see is that with Agile, you need to have more change management resources. And you need to have very skilled, very, people who are skilled and willing to get in there and have strategic perspective as well, so that you're really partnering. You're empowered teams. And the programmatic approach meant I had to go for a template, right? Templates for a lot of things that I did, whether it was the quick little release change strategy and plan, whether it was my, because you're going in and you're in the release commits, you're in the release readiness reviews, and there you are, change management has to present. Use a template. The only thing is, you got to hold a beautiful balance. What I call the beautiful balance between, okay, I got a programmatic approach with these templates, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to fall asleep on the job, do a cookie cutter change management approach, which I've seen, right? I've seen that it can happen really quickly with technical releases, that we fall into this sort of cookie cutter approach. And that means that you're going to miss some of the releases that have the greater impact. Or you're going to miss the hidden stakeholder group that doesn't get addressed. So those are some of the things. Let's see. Yeah, of course, I think we touched on most of the others. And then, of course, this ongoing environment that supports flexibility and continuous change, that's what I'm saying. You're buying in totally to Agile. And then our perspective has already been, at least I feel those of you I've spoken to before, is that we're all looking towards creating that culture that embraces change, that's not resistant to it, so that we can get beyond the change fatigue, right? Because if we're embracing it, then we're not resisting it, then it's not going to be as tiring. It should be a positive. So I do have here, and this is something that I've done it's actually 2 years ago. I was asked to go and present someplace because of my experiences. And so this is something I put together. So what I was saying, that leading change in Agile releases, this is the practical and the tactical. What do I think you need to have? A smooth track This means at the initiative level, make sure you take the time to do your organizational change management for Agile. This means that's laying a smooth track. So you've got to have all, and also wherever you can, even though you don't have scope completely, you don't have tied it down up front, you do have an awareness. You can gain an awareness and an early impact assessment or sensibility around where there might be some moments of significant impact. So plan for those ahead of time, have some of the mechanisms and the things ready in your back pocket so that you can deploy, right? So there's some upfront things that you want to do. And then just-in-time tailored change strategy, that's what we have to do. So you're going to have to vary. You can't go cookie cutter. Efficiency of motion is the template that I talked about. Also, I don't want to forget to mention that this is also where you are the stakeholder for the product manager that David was talking about. This is where you can, one of the things I was advocating for is how can we embed some of the performance support in the tool itself, right? So maybe they bring in WalkMe. Maybe it's something that is, maybe it's a third party. Maybe it is just integrated into the tool. But look for ways that you can have it embedded so that you're not having to create things entirely new. Then there's the empowering the team, making sure they can influence the strategy. Remember also with Agile, what are we talking about? Always continuous improvement. Retrospectives, how do we get better? So, get together with your team and say, how can we make this better each time? How can we get faster, but also better? And then you're just talking all the time. You're talking all the time. And then finally, there's not much of a time buffer. And if you don't allow and empower other people and create some of this programmatic, you will burn out. And so, so those are some of my things. Anybody else who wants to throw something out that they've come across or ideas that they have for how to deal with an Agile initiative, something that's worked well for you? Yeah.
I believe that we're too generic in speaking about stakeholders.
Okay.
And
agreed.
Yeah, and so in early stages of an Agile transformation, we really need to be having leadership stakeholders be in all-day workshops, which is an unusual change for them to be able to set strategy, gain alignment on values and outcomes. And how do you have a change strategy geared towards them and then pull in SMEs later?
Mm-hmm.
And we commingle talking about those, and they're very distinct audiences.
It's a very good point. That's the thing. We couldn't cover everything here, but we actually had that. We had a pretty intensive executive engagement.
Mm-hmm.
It was in its own track. We even brought a change person in specifically to handle the executive engagement so that they could understand and we could get the buy-in because there were so many stakeholder groups, which you would do with any initiative. But for the Agile, it was to help them understand what is going to be different about this particular program. How is it going to impact? What does that mean in terms of the resourcing commitments? What does this mean in terms of the reporting that's going to come to you, right? Because reporting, something we didn't even touch on, right? But that's one of those things that also squeezes the program manager is how do they report? So there's impacts there for the leadership to understand how things will be delivered and how engagement will be different.
Yes, and it's not only that this is a transformation because we're not trying to do it to them, but how can they help make decisions to help facilitate that process too? And so then
talk some more about that.
So there's a second change going on. The first change I talked about was just really segregating the leadership as stakeholders, the SMEs as stakeholders and users. The other change is how do we talk about the difference between project communications and change communications and make some distinctions there on what decisions need to be made in those respective areas.
So give me the Agile perspective on that.
So
because to me that's the same as for any project.
It's actually not because
I don't mean it's the same to Agile, but I'm just saying that we need to make that distinction for every project we're in. So what makes it different with Agile?
That's a great question. We probably could have a larger discussion on
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
Because we still, what I appreciated about the earlier perspective is if we've been given, $50 million,
Yeah.
we need to have a portfolio, budgetary and resourcing perspective. So those are the project programmatics. And that Agile change strategic communications would be, here are the decisions that have been made, here are the decisions that should be made, otherwise we jeopardize outcomes. That's a very different languaging than Project Management Institute and project communications.
That is a much larger conversation because now we are talking about things that occur at that portfolio management level.
But it still impacts the release.
Oh, yeah.
So-
Yeah. But I'm saying that, and we did have a whole way that we dealt with that, but that could be another conversation. Yeah.
So there's just a lot of change going on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's in so many different areas, which is why there's so many people who are reaching out and looking for events like this to find the answers, right? Because I actually think that we are figuring it out still. I think we're still in the process of figuring it out.
Totally in agreement.
And with so much change going on, naturally, there's a lot of change resistance that it's confronting, right? So one of the things I thought of, Rosemary, as you were speaking, was just how many times I've struggled to get executives to make the time to attend the training to understand the method that we're trying to apply here. And just because we got to get the point through to them that, guys, if you don't understand, ladies and gentlemen, how you need to think and behave differently, you're going to unwittingly completely undermine the whole effort. And again, a year or two from now, you're going to be looking backwards saying, that Agile stuff just really didn't pay out for us, right? We tried it just didn't work here. Agile, how many times have somebody heard somebody say, Agile doesn't work here? We tried Agile, we can't do Agile, it just doesn't work.
Well, there's two parts to that, right? One is because you've got a reference of what you're doing now.
Yeah, go ahead.
Imagine a blank canvas and the first thing you ever did was Agile. Then you have got nothing to compare with.
Yeah.
But because what you're doing now seems to be feels good or feels right, doing anything different will feel not so.
Out of your comfort zone.
Right. So one of the things I've done with large adoption here at Adobe and other places, slightly more bottom up. So large product lines which do adopt, go through the training of all the people, including the managers. And then I help them set up a adoption group, which is an adoption group is basically volunteers from the group who are both the sensors of what's going on, as well as the advocates of what change they want to make happen. Now that machinery has worked well because now they are the instrument of change as opposed to somebody else coming from outside and saying, make this change happen.
That's really powerful too.
And so
communities of practice and
right,
insiders.
So the adoption groups, standing up adoption groups from within the fold, and then going about incrementally adopting not just the practice but the environment.
Proselytizing. I mean, so as an Agile coach, I can say this: I'm always an outsider, so I'm always in the position of running the classes and teaching people. This is the concepts, these are the principles. This is how you need to apply them. But who am I? I'm an outsider. So that's really the power of these networks of insiders. Sometimes we call them communities of practice.
That's right.
What was the term you used?
We call them adoption group versus community of practice. The community of practice for us tends to span across the organization. Those who are interested in the subject matter,
a certain domain or a certain role.
Right. The community of practice has a broader lens, not with a view that I want to make that change happen
within this organization.
Yeah.
That is actually, I'm going to try to hit the accelerator a little bit because we started late and we're running long, but this is really one of the key things. And this was come up over and over again, right? So when we teach scaled Agile framework to people, and again, that's not the only way to do Agile, but it's a well-known way. We try to touch all of the communities that have anything to do with the solution delivery process. But what I rarely see is the organization recognizing this is an OCM challenge. This is a major organizational development challenge. So while it's usually not too hard to gain agreement that the teams, of course, need to go to training. I see, until very recently, I saw very few cases where people wanted to really think of this in OCM context. Now we're starting to get more success with applying ADCAR. Because people, maybe when they're a year into it, and they start asking that first question that we opened with, right? So where are the benefits? Then people start to see, yeah, actually, you're right. I've seen evidence of the resistance. Maybe we do need a resistance management plan. So yeah, we did a bunch of training, but maybe that wasn't enough. Maybe we're not doing enough reinforcement, right? So yeah, these differences are huge. They're profound. They're fundamental. It's just going through a class isn't going to get the behavior changes the next day. It takes a long time. It takes practice. It takes demonstration. So leaders who are willing to step up and be the champion and really evidence lean agile values, and actually being willing to talk to their peers and say, you really got to quit pounding the table about, I want to know exactly what you're going to deliver next year, because that's not the way we operate. Hard to find.
Would you say, though, that and when you look at methodology, waterfall versus agile, not a one size fits all for all projects? Agile does not fit well with every project that's out.
Yes, I would say that. I would say that. And I think Gartner actually has a model that I think is relevant here and interesting here. If you're familiar with the Gartner model, they talk about enterprise systems. And at one end of the continuum, they have what they refer to as systems of differentiation. Now, that's where you're really on the cutting edge. You're really driving your brand experience with your customers. And that's where Agile really shines. And the other end of the continuum, you have systems of record, right? And so you could make an argument that if you're replacing your GL, there might not be great value to doing that in an Agile way. I wouldn't have protracted debate with you. On the other hand, I'll say to you this: if you take this up as an organizational transformation, not as a means of executing a specific project, then you'll probably find maximum benefit from Agile transformation. And you'll probably find that you can, in fact, do everything in Agile. Whether you would debate that a certain effort didn't need to be done Agile, probably not a debate. This is slide
I would just beg to differ on.
Would you?
Of course, I'm Agile practitioner, and of course, I'm going to say this. The reason why people do Agile is because recognizing complex problems can't be linearized at the beginning. Can't just linearly assume all the things and say these things will happen. If you believe you're doing simple projects, go ahead and do waterfall. Baking bread is a simple idea, and we know this for thousands of years. We could do it linearly, no problem. You don't need to iterate on it. But software, most projects, if you think of projects, any projects in complex systems are complex problems. You just touched on from a stakeholder and those perspectives. You said dozens of how they're impacted. So trying to solve them as waterfall is the wrong way. The other part of this, waterfall, the concept of waterfall, the original paper written on waterfall had quoted in there in one of the pages nobody adopted, which was, hey, doing waterfall is good, but you will need rapid feedback and iteration, and that was all dropped off. So I would challenge you, if you ever say, hey, we don't need to do we shouldn't do Agile in here, ask yourself, is that a simple project?
Also look at this. So I like to include this slide because, we've been talking a lot about how hard this is. Right? Well, no rational person chooses to take on something as difficult as Agile transformation arbitrarily. There's got to be some big time payback for it to be worth the pain, right? It's a lot of change. So these are not my numbers. And in fact, these are not even Scaled Agile's numbers, but these numbers do originate from large multi-billion-dollar multinational companies who have adopted Scaled Agile and have given them case studies. And if you think about an organization of any substantial size that would have hundreds of people involved in solution delivery, these numbers have really huge economic value. A 30 to 75% faster time to market can make the difference between life and death for a lot of products, right? Be it 20 to 50% increase in productivity. A lot of my consulting is with Cisco, their information technology organization, which is thousands of people around the globe. I'm sure that would dollarize into a number that starts. We can achieve that across that whole scale of that organization. So this is a big deal. This is the promise, right? So this is the grail that a lot of people are after when they take on Scaled Agile. The problem is it's very, very easy to become what I like to call INO, A-I-N-O, Agile in name only. It's really simple to get there. But getting there is not going to give you those big benefits. Really easy to buy the Agile tooling. You start using Rally or Jira or whatever. You start writing BRDs. You start writing user stories and features. You start showing burn up and burn down charts. And boy, you really look Agile. You got all the window dressing, but you don't see a great, where's that leap in productivity, man? 20 to 50%. I don't see that. Are we getting that? Because if we don't actually internalize the mindset, and a lot of this has to do with leadership and the way leadership makes decisions and drives the organization. If they don't internalize the mindset, they will undermine those outcomes, won't actually get them. So it's a big change. Typically in our programs, we've seen hundreds of team members that have to adopt a new way of working. That's hard to get ingrained. It's hard to get good at. These changes are not subtle. They're not minor changes. They're big changes. The way we work is completely different. So to me, this really is the case for organizational change management support for the Agile transformation itself. And this is what I've been proselytizing over the last year with my clients is don't underestimate the magnitude of this organizational change. If you have change management people, let's get them involved. If you don't have change management people, let's get some and get them involved. We need to have a communications plan, a training plan. We need to have a resistance management plan. What are you going to do with all the people that are sitting there with their arms folded going, yeah, blah, blah. I've seen initiatives come and initiatives go. I've been here 15 years and this will go too. And you know, we'll be back to our BRDs next year. Right? How are you going to confront that? Right? That's going to undermine the effort.
David, Billy, one thing I wanted to ask, as you said that, one of the reasons that typically happens often is because in organizations, budgeting is done at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
It's not iterative.
That's right.
So therefore, everything else that follows after that, whether you do all the change management, Agile adoption, all that, it breaks down because guess what? Whoever got to the budget door first.
Yeah.
So
this takes
I don't have an answer, by the way. So
I probably don't have a silver bullet for you either. But I think where you're going is this takes dollars, right? Everything I'm talking about.
Right.
If we're going to invest in organizational change management to make Agile work, that takes dollars. That takes budget, right? That's why I think I'm coming to be of the opinion, as my experience with this evolves, that generally speaking, the most successful and enduring efforts are those where an organization takes this up, not as a way of executing a given program, but as a way of being, as an organizational transformation that they expect to endure for years and years and years, and to keep paying them back. And therefore, and they understand how hard it is, and therefore they're willing to allocate dollars to it.
And the place I've seen that work best in that way, Salesforce, and only because at one point in their life they nearly failed completely as a company.
So they had an existential threat that they had to confront.
That this is not that's
very motivating.
And most companies don't ever see that enough
Or recognize
that
there are in fact facing.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question. So earlier when you did the triangle and inverted triangle and you were talking about how goals come into play.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you leverage that? I mean, what I imagine is that you may be able to leverage that when it comes to your budgeting and to your messaging and things where you're not able to have crystal clear scope. But can you talk about like how you leverage goals?
In that scaled Agile portfolio process, we have these ideas called epics. And so these are big problems we want to solve, or big products we want to deliver, or solutions we want to deliver that are going to deliver some economic value. Right? And so in that safe portfolio our unit of work there is what we call a portfolio epic. And so there, we're not talking about exactly how we're going to go about delivering this thing or exactly what the detailed scope is going to be. We want to leave, basically, the idea is at each level, you want to minimally constrain the people who are going to take this forward and break it down further. It doesn't mean no constraints. It means you're being thoughtful about minimum constraints on how they can go about doing it. But we're making a commitment in the portfolio that this is the problem we're going to try to solve. And this is what we're able and willing to invest in solving it over the next time period, whether that's the next quarter or the next fiscal year. And then the lean agile leadership we need from them is the willingness to allow the scope to develop over time as we attack it, as opposed to demanding that the scope gets nailed down with a very.
And so is there still an expectation that the Agile project team will achieve that goal, or
Yes, absolutely. There's absolutely
the
an
resolution
expectation that-
at the end of that whole cycle, they just won't have clarity as to what they're going to get in each release
So,
leading up
and
to it?
when we're making those investment decisions, we haven't forgotten everything we once knew about ideas of an investment management, right? We haven't forgotten that such an idea is net present value, right? We're saying we're going after this, the nature of the value is this, the magnitude of the value is that, here's what we're going to invest over this period of time. And so we can rationally decide how to prioritize those potential investments. What we're not doing is saying, here's the exact scope we're going to deliver that's going to unlock that value. So we're trying to leave the latitude to the team to figure out what's the right scope. The other thing that's important to recognize is all of these processes are iterative, right? And with each iteration, we are constantly reprioritizing the work that's still on our plate, or we use the term backlog. So that backlog could be a list of portfolio epics at the portfolio level. And we're constantly reprioritizing. So at any moment, something new and more valuable could come in and basically trump everything else that was on the list. That is the essence of agile decision. It only works if we do that.
A good example is when we're automating certain processes, right? Like taking our service offerings to market. So there's so many different processes within that. And so if you can still cast the vision that we're going to automate this process, but you're not actually showing exactly how you're going to do that yet. That can be really
It evolves over time, right? And that's why the iterative nature, the stakeholder engagement, fast feedback, these are all keys to making that succeed.
And the challenge we've seen is that at that point, portfolio prioritizing on the goals. How do you do it? Because the numbers you're associating with, whether it's the cost of the revenue or how much is going to return to you, those are all very, at a high level of speculation. You don't know. Now, the one thing I would say, David, there is that because you're iterating, you can stop the investment at any iteration. You may decide we're going down this path, it's not the right thing now. Because in the traditional waterfall, you will have invested without even experiencing anything, and so you're stopping potentially to it.
Hey, David, quick question.
Yeah.
Just like any other good Scrum Master, how are we doing on time boxing?
Yeah, we're going way long. Thank you for that, Pete. I appreciate that. So I'm going to just hit the accelerator and wrap this up. This is sort of my summary for the case for change management in support of an agile transformation. If you're experiencing an agile transformation and there's no investment or inadequate investment in change management, you can expect outcomes like this, right? People don't really get the new mindset, don't start behaving the way we need them to behave, and therefore you don't get the actual results. Very likely you'll wind up at some point with executives looking at each other across the table saying, why didn't Agile work for us? When we thought we did it right, did we not do it right? No. And a lot of times, frankly, this is just one guy's opinion. My experience with teams that end up in that position, very often the major root cause, the major original sin lies with leadership. Leadership didn't get the mindset shift. So leadership is viewing it as, yeah, okay, I don't care if engineering wants to be agile. They can be agile. Fine, go be agile. I'm still going to keep driving them the way I drive them because that's what I'm here for, is to drive them mercilessly. That'll undermine. We do think in general, this is a relatively high risk change for most organizations. If you're familiar with this chart from ProSci training, that we think, and I've seen, some might even be higher than that, depends on the nature of the organization. So in general, one should avoid generalizing. Here's my general statement. Most organizations need to recognize there's a really good chance of failure if we don't attend to the organizational change management aspect. That's it, I'm done. Questions, comments? Final question, comment? Guys, change manager, energized about no
question, David. So thanks for sharing all the different impacts at the different levels of the organization, up and down. Can't go after everything. How would you slice it in terms of sequencing it?
Well, that's an interesting point. So I would, again, I see the primary failure mode as being leadership. I would definitely want to get as much time as probably my greatest frustration at this point in my career is leaders who say, I don't have time for Agile training. It drives me nuts. I want to shake them by the collar and say, don't you understand? This whole thing is going to keel over if you don't get on board with it. Right? So I would say definitely that's number one. Then I would say the next most sensitive potential point of failure in my experience would be product management. I think that's the toughest. When we're talking in the context of SAFe, I think that's the toughest role in all of SAFe. Product management is really the nexus of most of the competing forces in this model. So I'd probably focus really next on product management and getting that relationship with change management. After that, I don't know if this. So I'm not a tools vendor, just to be clear, but a lot of these problems and challenges we talked about can be remediated somewhat with technology. So you talked, Meg, about the idea of technology embedded in the product that makes the work of change management easier, and I think that's a great idea. It's just exactly analogous to the way we talk to testers. When testers are pushing back at, I can't repeat 2,000 test cases every week. Then our answer is, yeah, if you're doing them all manually, of course you can. That's why you can't do them all manually. We're going to have to invest in test automation. It's the only way you're going to survive. So that's another area that I think can help to basically depressurize the whole team.
But that's also equally good example of where tester will, hey, they're not the one who's making the decision or investment decisions about, hey, what is the automation frameworks we're going to adopt or anything like that.
And that's brilliant because that comes back to the resistance management plan, right? When the testers start bringing this resistance to Agile on the basis that we can't possibly get along with this, we need to have a resistance management plan that anticipates that, and we have a playbook for how to confront it. You're right, that's a leadership issue. Leadership needs to understand, if I'm going to make this possible for my testers, I've got to invest in test automation. If I'm going to make it possible for my systems engineering team to do deployments potentially every 2 weeks, I'm going to have to invest in deployment automation. If I don't do that, I don't write that check, this whole thing's going to fail, and we're going to be sitting here a year later going, why didn't Agile work?
I've also seen it fail when they straddle between the two methodologies, where they say it's Agile, but it's clearly waterfall, but they use Jira, and they say, well, it's Agile.
The most nauseating term I've heard this year is Agile. And that term came from Boston Consulting Group.
Oh, wow.
BCG has the nerve to talk to people about Agile. Anyway, I won't get on that side. Thanks, guys. This has been a great conference. The waterfall. Waterfall, Agile.
David, if you could allow me just one more question.
Yeah,
Since we have change management folks. Would you consider change management folks as part of product change management? Who have to deal with lots of change in preparation for release? Would you consider them to be part of the release train organization, or would you just consider them more as a shared services as one?
Probably the latter. Probably shared services. But honestly, I'm not sure I've got the right answer there.
I'd like to understand more
that
about
the
that.
scale of the work they have to undertake might be the determining factor.
If I can just say a little bit about that.
Yeah.
We're going through the Agile transformation, and initially we really didn't even understand what was going on. It was just coming at us, and we're trying to get our arms around it. And we were we were put through training and we kept saying, where do we fit in here? And they kept saying, oh, you don't. This is technology.
That's the
this
gap.
is, and we kept saying, but we have to.
Yeah.
So they finally allowed us to start participating in the big room planning or the feature planning, which helped a ton. I mean, now we at least have that visibility into what's coming down.
At the high level,
Right.
here's what's targeted for, what is it, the quarterly?
Yes.
process?
Yeah. Quarterly.
That's typical.
Yeah, those feature planning workshops.
Yep.
We as change managers, we attended and we went into the different sessions and, listen in, you have to be embedded there. And that's why it's hard to say too, you have to look at the size of what's being delivered and so the number of tracks and the frequency of releases to figure out how many change managers do you need.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm interested though in a kind of a group think on Pete's question here though, because
Yeah.
I mean, so in my mind, I think what's most important is that change managers probably align to audiences. So I see this as a matrix management problem, right? You got a bunch of products, you got a bunch of audiences. How do you align? You align to products? Do you align to audiences?
You align.
So we did about 3 iterations,
To figure out.
and we did in fact do the managed service iteration. Did not work for our organization, so we have absolutely pivoted on that. And I have
Meaning
my change managers sitting here, and they are now for this upcoming fiscal year aligned by user groups, stakeholder groups.
Yeah, social audience.
Because what we found for our environment is because even with product managers and with the program team is so focused on develop, deliver, iterate, even if they're doing Agile, and frankly, we're still doing kind of Agile or Agile Fall, or it depends, or sometimes called
Water
Agile, but
Scrum.
isn't, right? But in any case, they're from a mindset perspective, they're so focused on design, develop, deliver, on that inward out, that they lose track of that user in perspective. And yes, they do have some subject matter experts, but even the subject matter experts get sucked into that mental model of design, develop, deliver, and they forget about the people that aren't in the room.
The problem is that chain lacks the most important link in the chain.
Yeah.
Design, develop, deliver, adopt.
Yes. And
Don't adopt, you'll never get the value.
well, and I would say even more than adoption is what you teed up at the very beginning is clear on the outcome. And we discuss this all the time. Guys, this is speech 42. I'm somewhat interested in the go live. Not really all that much. I'm mostly interested in the business outcome. And refocusing the conversation on the business outcome and understanding when you're putting together your communications, your training, when you're packaging those agile sprints up